Hi, I'm Rashonda Kay. This is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading The House Behind the Cedars by Charles Chesnutt. We got started with chapter 1. We've got a few more pages to go in chapter 1, so let's get started. Warwick's first glance had revealed the fact that the young woman was strikingly handsome, with a stately beauty seldom encountered. As he walked along behind her at a measured distance, I can only imagine he enjoyed the view. As he walked along behind her at a measured distance, he could not help noting the details that made up this pleasing impression. He did enjoy the view, for his mind was singularly alive to beauty in whatever embodiment. The girl's figure he perceived was admirably proportioned. She was evidently at the period when the angles of childhood were rounding into the promising curves of adolescence. Oh, wait, she's a little young. Okay, let's keep reading. Her abundant hair of a dark and glossy brown was neatly plaited and coiled above an ivory column that rose straight from a pair of gently sloping shoulders, clearly outlined beneath the light muslin frock that covered them. He could see that she was tastefully, though not richly, dressed, and that she walked with an elastic step that revealed a light heart and the vigor of perfect health. Her face, of course, he could not analyze, since he had caught only the one brief but convincing glimpse of it. The young woman kept on down Front Street, Warwick maintaining his distance a few rods behind her. They passed a factory, a warehouse or two, and then, leaving the brick pavement, walked along on Mother Earth under a leafy arcade of spreading oaks and elms. Okay, so he walks behind her past a factory, past a warehouse or two, till the sidewalk ends and they're just walking out in grass. At no point did she look over her shoulder and be like, who is this? Who is following me? Wow. All right. It's not awkward for anybody yet. Okay. Their way led now through a residential portion of the town, which, as they advanced, gradually declined from staid respectability to poverty, open and unabashed. Warwick observed, as they passed through the respectable quarter, that few people who met the girl greeted her, and that some others whom she passed at gates or doorways gave her no sign of recognition, from which he inferred that she was possibly a visitor in the town and not well acquainted. How is he still walking behind her? Where is he going? What is happening? Their walk had continued not more than 10 minutes when they crossed a creek by a wooden bridge. They're going over a creek on a bridge now? Come on. And came to a row of mean houses standing flush with the street. At the door of one, an old black woman had stooped to lift a large basket piled high with laundered clothes. The girl, as she passed, seized one end of the basket and helped the old woman to raise it to her head, where it rested solidly on the cushion of her head kerchief. During this interlude, Warwick, though he had slackened his pace measurably, had so nearly closed the gap between himself and them as to hear the old woman say with the dulcet Negro intonation, "Tank you, honey, de Lord gwine bless you sho. You was always a good gal, and de Lord love everybody what helped a po' old nigger. You gwine ter have good luck all your born days." "I hope you're a true prophet, Aunt Zilphy," laughed the girl in response. The sound of her voice gave Warwick a thrill. It was soft and sweet and clear, quite in harmony with her appearance. That it had a faint suggestiveness of the old woman's accent he hardly noticed, for the current Southern speech, including his own, was rarely without a touch of it. The corruption of the white people's speech was one element, only one, of the Negro's unconscious revenge for his own debasement. Like, I needed to slow blink there. I'm not entirely sure what I just read. Okay, so we suffered through this bit of dialect. I will get better at reading it and we won't be suffering as much. Then we hear that everybody in the South has a little bit of a drawl. Okay, that's all cool. I do want to go back to her ivory neck and was it chestnut brown hair and plaits. If you are familiar with the trope of the tragic mulatta, they are often described in terms just like that. And so nobody talked to her. She's walking through the nice part of town, but she gets to the bad part of town, AKA the black part of town. And then she stops and she helps an old lady, and she calls the old lady Aunt Zilphy, which may or may not mean this woman is her aunt. It could just be a title of respect. So anyway, what made me pause was the corruption of the white people's speech was one element, only one, of the Negro's unconscious revenge for his own debasement. Okay, so that sets up this thing that white people talk correctly, and anybody who doesn't talk like them is talking incorrectly. I don't love that. It was 1900 though, and we'll see where this takes us. And it says that the corruption of the white people's speech was an unconscious revenge. Can revenge happen unconsciously? Is it revenge if it's unconscious? And are we certain that the corruption of a language was an unconscious thing? I could see that as a very conscious revenge. Now, everybody who exercises it may not be in the market for revenge, and they may not know that it is like revenge. I get that, but I don't know, you can twist what people say and then give it back to them and be like, I have made this my own, like Black people eating chitlins. It was what we could get, so we ate it, and we made it a thing that was ours. I personally don't like chitlins. I don't want to eat entrails. But I've been described as bougie by many. I don't think I'm bougie, but I'm clearly bougier than others. So that's a whole road I'm sure I don't need to go down and probably didn't need to bring up, but I was like, the corruption of the white people's speech? All right, I'll keep reading. The houses they passed now grew scattering, and the quarter of the town more neglected. Warwick, how is he still following her? What is happening? Warwick felt himself wondering where the girl might be going in a neighborhood so uninviting. Well, of course, and she's probably wondering, why is this man following me? When she stopped to pull a half-naked Negro child out of a mud hole and set him upon his feet, he thought she might be some young lady from the upper part of the town bound on some errand of mercy, or going perhaps to visit an old servant or look for a new one. Once she threw a backward glance at Warwick, thus enabling him to catch a second glimpse of a singularly pretty face. Perhaps the young woman found his presence in the neighborhood as unaccountable as he had deemed hers. For finding his glance fixed upon her, she quickened her pace with an air of startled timidity. Yes, this man has been following you like all afternoon. Get away, get help, or turn around and confront him with it. Something, this is not right. A woman with such a figure, because he liked what he saw, a woman with such a figure, thought Warwick, ought to be able to face the world with the confidence of Phryne confronting her judges. I do not know who Phryne is, Phryne. I will have to look that up. Phryne and obsequies. I'm already learning so much. By the time Warwick was conscious that something more than mere grace or beauty had attracted him with increasing force toward this young woman. Oh no, by this time Warwick was conscious that something more than mere grace or beauty had attracted him with increasing force toward this woman. The suggestion, at first faint and elusive, of something familiar had grown stronger when he heard her voice, and became more and more pronounced with each rod of their advance. And when she stopped finally before a gate, and opening it, went into a yard shut off from the street by a row of dwarf cedars. Warwick had already discounted in some measure the surprise he would have felt at seeing her enter there had he not walked down Front Street behind her. There was still sufficient unexpectedness about the act, however, to give him a decided thrill of pleasure. It must be Rena, he murmured. Who could have dreamed that she would blossom out like that? It must surely be Rena. He walked slowly past the gate and peered through a narrow gap in the cedar hedge. The girl was moving along a sanded walk toward a gray, unpainted house with a steep roof broken by dormer windows. The trace of timidity he had observed in her had given place to the more assured bearing of one who was upon his own ground. The garden walks were bordered by long rows of jonquils, pinks and carnations, enclosing clumps of fragrant shrubs, lilies, and roses already in bloom. Toward the middle of the garden stood two fine magnolia trees with heavy dark green glistening leaves, while nearer the house 2 mighty elms shaded a wide piazza, at one end of which a honeysuckle vine and at the other a Virginia creeper running over a wooden lattice furnished additional shade and seclusion. On dark and wintry days, the aspect of this garden must have been extremely somber and depressing, and it might well have seemed a fit place to hide some guilty or disgraceful secret. Excuse me? Why are we trying to hide guilty and disgraceful secrets? And what sounds somber about this? It sounds lovely. It sounds overgrown, but it sounds lovely with all of the flora. I'm very intrigued. So why is Chesnutt giving this bit of a fit place to hide some guilty or disgraceful secret? Surely there is a guilty or disgraceful secret to hide. Did you notice that this house was behind Cedars? And we are reading The House Behind the Cedars. All right, let's keep going. But on the bright morning when Warwick stood looking through the cedars, it seemed, with its green frame and canopy and its bright carpet of flowers, an ideal retreat from the fierce sunshine and the sultry heat of the approaching summer. The girl stooped to pluck a rose, and as she bent over it, her profile was clearly outlined. She held the flower to her face with a long-drawn inhalation, then went up the steps, crossed the piazza, opened the door without knocking, and entered the house with the air of one thoroughly at home. Yes, said the young man to himself, it's Rena, sure enough. The house stood on a corner, around which the cedar hedge turned, continuing along the side of the garden until it reached the line of the front of the house. The piazza to a rear wing, at right angles to the front of the house, was open to inspection from the side street, which, to judge from its deserted look, seemed to be but little used. Turning into this street and walking leisurely past the brickyard, which was only slightly screened from the street by a china tree, Warwick perceived the young woman standing on the piazza, facing an elderly woman who sat in a large rocking chair, plying a pair of knitting needles on a half-finished stocking. Warwick's walk led him within 3 feet of the side gate, which he felt an almost irresistible impulse to enter. Every detail of the house and garden was familiar. 1,000 cords of memory and affection drew him thither, but a strong counter-motive prevailed. With a great effort, he restrained himself, and after a momentary pause, walked slowly on past the house, with a backward glance, which he turned away when he saw that it was observed. Okay, so he's following this woman who seems a little young for him. I don't know. And then he realizes it's Rena, somebody he knows from his past, and he totally recognizes the house, and he is drawn to it, and he wants to go greet the people there, but he can't, because he's not a black man anymore. Whatever his name was, he's now Warwick, this white man who followed somebody who seems to be white, but that's questionable, through the whole city and through good neighborhoods and back neighborhoods all the way to her house, and now he's just going to walk past like he was supposed to be there. This is fascinating and bizarre. Let's keep reading. Warwick's attention had been so fully absorbed by the house behind the cedars and the women there that he had scarcely noticed on the other side of the neglected by-street 2 men working by a large open window in a low-roofed building with a clapboarded roof directly opposite the back piazza occupied by the 2 women. Both the men were busily engaged in shaping barrel staves, each wielding a sharp-edged drawing knife on a piece of seasoned oak clasped tightly in a wooden vise. I just wonder who that man is and what he's doing on this street, observed the younger of the 2 with a suspicious air. I would be suspicious too. He had noticed the gentleman's involuntary pause and his interest in the opposite house, and had stopped work for a moment to watch the stranger as he went on down the street. Never mind about that man, said the elder one. You tend to your work and finish that barrel stave. You spends entirely too much of your time stretching your neck after other people. And you needn't disturb yourself about them folks across the street, for they ain't yo kin, and you're wasting your time both in your mind with them, or with folks what comes on the street on account of them. Whew. Okay, let me try not to read that with the dialect. I'm gonna get better at this, I really am. Okay, never mind about that man, said the elder one. You tend to your work and finish that barrel stave. You spend entirely too much of your time stretching your neck after other people, and you needn't disturb yourself about them folks across the street, for they ain't your kin, and you're wasting your time both in your mind with them. That doesn't quite make sense to me. Or with folks what comes on down the street on account of them. Look sharp now, boy, or you'll get that stave trimmed too much. The younger man resumed his work, but still found time to throw a slanting glance out of the window. The gentleman, he perceived, stood for a moment on the rotting bridge across the old canal, and then walked slowly ahead until he turned to the right onto Back Street a few rods farther on. Well, thus ends chapter 1 of House Behind the Cedars. It has set up a lot of conundrums for us. Is the plural of conundrum conundra? Conundri? I don't know. I'm Rashonda Cade. This is Reading with Rashonda. We're reading House Behind the Cedars by Charles Chesnutt.